Tonight on Primetime, Russia and Ukraine exchanged some of their heaviest drone attacks in months, with strikes hitting cities, energy infrastructure and residential areas on both sides of the border. The two sides keep striking, but is peace any closer? Good evening. Russia and Ukraine are trading major drone attacks, with civilians again paying the price. Well, overnight strikes hit Odessa and Dnipro, while Moscow says it intercepted hundreds of Ukrainian drones.
Russia launched overnight drone and missile strikes on Ukraine, targeting the southern city of Odessa and the southeastern city of Dnipro, Ukrainian officials said Monday. Authorities reported at least 12 people were injured in attacks across central and southern regions of the country. In Odessa, a major Black Sea export port, drones struck residential buildings as well as a school and kindergarten. Regional officials said an 11-year-old boy and a 59-year-old man were injured. In Dnipro, Regional Governor Alexander Hanja said at least 9 people were wounded in the attacks. The latest Russian strikes come after Ukraine carried out one of its largest attacks on the Moscow region since the start of the war more than 4 years ago. Russian authorities said at least 4 people were killed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the large-scale drone operation was a response to continued Russian attacks on Ukraine.
The Russians need to think about their refineries, their oil facilities, their enterprises, and not about how to disrupt the lives of other peoples in Ukraine, Moldova, or any other neighboring country. Today, the activity indicators show that our proactive operations per day are higher than those of the Russians, and this is a very serious result. We will increase all forms of supply for our army: drones, ground robots, shells, all resources to maintain proper protection and our active frontline operations.
Russian officials claimed more than 1,000 Ukrainian drones were intercepted over the past 24 hours. Russia's defense ministry said it intercepted 556 drones overnight and into Sunday morning, with another 30 drones shot down after dawn. According to the ministry, the interceptions took place across 14 Russian regions, as well as annexed Crimea and over the Black and Azov Seas, marking one of the largest Ukrainian aerial assaults of the war so far.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now. After the break, we'll take a look at the formal opening of the World Urban Forum 13 here in Baku and the global challenges shaping the future of cities. Don't go away.
Moi, Luis Moreno Campo, déclare solennellement.
We've seen remarkable developments between Baku and Yerevan.
We are against all of this kind of peace.
Russia does not want Pashinyan to win. Russia wants perpetual conflict.
A region that's in conflict or in tension is better for their ability to play a role.
Russian oligarchs are less about money and more about political influence. Russia can make its own interventions through online postings.
Que je remplirai mes devoirs et exercerai mes attributions de procureur de la Cour pénale internationale.
Money in politics everywhere is corrupting influence, but when it becomes weaponized by a foreign power.
The main thing we have money. Too much resources, too much money.
The main topic is to change Pashinyan.
They have both and Big Boss. Big Boss which is in Russia.
L'impartialité et en toute conscience.
We are for pressuring Pashinyan. We are organizing rallies on the streets.
Y que ya respetaré el carácter confidencial de esa enquesta.
They are election time. And election time is everything's binary.
La ciudad que remuevan a Pashinyan.
A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, Baku is hosting WOOF 13's Urban Expo, where countries, cities and international organisations are examining practical ways to build more sustainable, inclusive and resilient urban communities. A-News's Nurai Mustafa has more.
World Urban Forum 13 Urban Expo, taking place at the Baku Olympic Stadium, brings together countries, cities and international organizations from around the world. The exhibition, officially opened today, showcases innovative solutions for sustainable and inclusive urban living. More than 20,000 visitors are expected to attend the event. The Urban Expo presents practical solutions to urban challenges related to housing, transport, energy, waste management and climate change. More than 200 organizations from 66 countries are participating in the exhibition. One of the key venues of the expo is the UN Habitat Pavilion, where visitors can explore various presentations and take part in interactive activities focused on urban life and housing issues. The Business and Innovation Hub features innovative technologies and solutions in urban planning and housing. The venue also includes a dedicated startup pavilion and hosts a range of discussions on urban development. The Urban Expo also hosts panel discussions and a meeting throughout the program. One such discussion held at the pavilion of the South Enjai platform focused on water scarcity and the management of water resources. Speakers from Pakistan, Lebanon, Nigeria and Oman took part in the panel. Discussions centered on the protection and effective management of water resources and growing urbanization and climate change. The speakers also highlighted the importance of international cooperation in ensuring water security.
Now all of our members that are in Baku and not in Baku have a platform to raise their voices, raise their concerns about their communities and provide solutions to the problems that they have. So just now we had an event with member organizations from Lebanon, from Pakistan, from Oman and from other countries where they voiced their concerns, specifically in, for example, Kenya and Nigeria, where they talked about water scarcity and drought.
So a forum like this sensitizes people, creates awareness so that we are able to work together. We don't need to go anywhere else to say, come and help me build my bridge. You build good bridges. You can do it for us much easier than to go and borrow money somewhere else to come and do it. So that's why I put a lot of emphasis in this platform, because it's also inclusive. It's people-centered, you know, and it's very inclusive. And so that is what I put emphasis on.
Meanwhile, the Urban Library section presents the latest research and urban planning and housing policy, including the World Cities Report 2026. And at the Urban Cinema venue, visitors can watch short films exploring urbanization and city life. Nuray Mustafa, Natik Mehmedov, Zohrab Shirinov for A-News.
Well, as the event opens in Baku, leaders are warning that the future of cities is no longer just about housing and planning, but stability, security and identity.
The 13th session of the World Urban Forum in Baku has brought global leaders together to address a critical reality. The rapid growth of world cities is now directly impacting global stability and security. Speaking at the high-level session, Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev delivered a warning about the rising global housing.
Today, almost 3 billion people worldwide lack adequate housing. More than 1 billion of them live in informal settlements and slums, while more than 300 million people have no shelter at all. Put it simply, urbanization is becoming a critical factor that directly impacts global stability and security.
The rapid transformation of the host nation itself was highly commended during the session. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić pointed to Azerbaijan's development as a prime global example of what targeted urban planning can achieve.
Whenever I come to Baku, whenever I come to Azerbaijan, and it happens at least once a year, I see big changes. I see a lot of progress that you Azerbaijani people and President Aliyev did together for the sake of your people and for the sake of your country. That's why Baku looks like the very best places in today's world. I very much admire him.
However, the forum also highlighted that urban challenges differ heavily by geography. Kyrgyz President Sadir Japarov shifted the global spotlight to the unique vulnerabilities of mountain cities.
Unfortunately, glacier melting, climate change, population migration, and increasing pressure on ecosystems are negatively affecting cities located in high mountain and foothill regions. We propose considering the establishment of an international association of mountain cities.
While adapting to the future, leaders argued that modernization must not erase the past. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze stressed that contemporary urban planning must protect cultural heritage.
A city is a vessel for nation's identity. Our initiatives are guided by a commitment to the preservation of traditional Georgian architectural heritage. We believe that modernization must not come at the cost of history.
The broader agenda of WUF13 is just getting underway. Discussions on housing finance, climate resilience, and urban innovation will continue in Baku until Friday.
Well, joining me now is regional analyst Sheraz Khan to discuss the wider significance of WUF13 and why urban development is becoming such an important global issue. Sheraz, great to have you with us in the studio. Thank you as always for joining us. I mean, this has really inspired the whole city, hasn't it, this event?
Yeah.
About much more than just city planning, clearly. How much of this is also about soft power?
Well, so I will say that it is not half-half, but 60% is the urban development, the housing and all that. But obviously it comes up with the soft power of the country which is hosting, which is Azerbaijan, which is very significant at this point in time because there are almost 182 countries people are represented from, you know, and they are from different walks of life, very important people, you know, ministers and government representatives, people associated with the climate change and ministries and all that, economics and all that, and politicians, scholars, academia, everyone important is here from 182 different countries. So it gives Baku a platform and a recognition that Baku is just not the corridor for the energy to the European Union or other parts of the world, but Baku is actually hosting a very, very, very important challenge which is coming ahead. 2050, it would be 70% of the people of the world are expected to come to the urban areas, leaving all these rural areas of the villages. Why? Because urbanization is, you know, has been growing for quite a long time. 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, there were like, I don't know, maybe 10% of the people were living in urban cities, or the cities or urban places. But now it's been growing. This is a big challenge. You know why this is a big challenge? Because 2000, as I said, 2050, 70% people would be there. So it is around 2.8 billion people need home,
And if you start making cities like London, right? So you need, for like every month for 25 years, you need to make a city like London for 25 years every month.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean,
so it is not a regional problem. It is not Baku's problem. It is not European. It's a global problem now, and you know, this kind of a problem is, and then Baku is hosting that, which is Baku is playing a very, very pivotal role in not only the energy, and it's not only responsible for the energy corridors or the middle corridor or the other connections with the world, but it is actually hosting a very big challenge which is coming ahead in 2000, whatever it is, but it is of a very serious concern, by the way. So I would call it 40% is obviously diplomacy and all that, but it gives a platform to Baku to host this and to play its important role, and bringing all these countries together under one roof or under one stadium or whatever the place is. And people are really happy and they're really concerned, and they are addressing this issue on the ministerial level, on the philosophical level, on the education level, on every level possible. And obviously this is a part of the thing. Urbanization has to happen. But how urbanization would happen? Is it environmental friendly? Is it feasible? Is it sustainable? You know, you can make plazas and you can make 200-story building, but is it feasible enough? Because urbanization does not only connect people coming in into the city, but it is related to different aspects of life. Communication is there. Schools are there, infrastructures are there, jobs are there, and so on and so forth. Life is very important. So whatever is connected with life, that has to be very feasible and very environmental, because we have a problem with we have a lot of environmental challenges in the world as well.
Yes,
because the environment is changing. It's a global warming coming in. The world is changing. There's a floods coming in. That also adds on the thing. There are pandemics come in that also adds in and helps people to migrate from one place to another place. So there are such a global challenge this is, and Baku is hosting that. So.
And in terms of the hosting, Sheraz, I remember working in Qatar at the time of the 2022 World Cup, and it became really apparent that there are only a relatively small number of countries in the world capable of hosting these mega events.
Yeah.
Azerbaijan has now had a very successful COP29. We've got off to a great start here with WOOF 13. Has Azerbaijan, do you think, now unquestionably joined that exclusive club of those countries who, particularly in this difficult geopolitical environment, are capable of delivering successful global events?
So talking about, giving a reference of COP29, COP29 was another big issue, climate change. And Azerbaijan has brought in the same kind of people from different parts of the world, the leadership, and discussed that thing. And now this part, I think Azerbaijan has emerged not only a very important and significant middle power in the region, in the South Caucasus, which provides energy, which provides the other facility to different countries, but also is a platform, is a place where such an important decisions are being made. It says, environmental challenges or COP29 was a very important issue. It's a world issue where people just gather in Azerbaijan. Now this is another world issue. So Azerbaijan has emerged as a platform, as a place where these global leaders come and discuss the future issues. So I think Azerbaijan has gone beyond a very strong middle power to the policy making side of it, to the policy player, a very important policy player of the world. So this is a shift This is a shift. This is a step higher than whatever Azerbaijan was a couple of years back.
Yeah, and in terms of those policies, as you mentioned, so many different governments from around the world have got representatives here at this event, and such a difficult range of issues that they have to try and solve relating to the world's biggest cities all at the same time. So immigration, sustainability, more and more people living, demanding infrastructure, but also inclusivity. Many cities are becoming unaffordable for younger people. So there's so many problems that officials need to try and solve at the same time. They're urgent problems. Do you think governments, generally speaking, are going fast enough?
Okay, no, governments are not as fast as the growth is going. Okay, so it's very hard for governments to manage this, unless until the city mayors come in and play their own part of it. Because obviously the governments or the countries are dependent on the mayors. As, for example, the mayor of London, if he does not perform, the government would be just relying on him, or maybe change the mayor or whatever it is. And that takes a lot of time. So unless until the cities themselves develop and help, and obviously then the investors would play a big role. For example, if you want to develop a place, all right, so the investors are there, the organizations play their own part, the government plays their own part, the city mayors would play their own part. So everybody would play their part, and everybody is here in Baku, from the mayors to the ministers, to the head of states, to the economic guys, to the philosophers, to the economists, to the researchers. Everyone is here. That's why they're discussing it. And this is being discussed for the future in July, whatever will happen in New York on the United Nations level. So this is basically a book which is being made, which will be discussed in the United Nations in July. So Azerbaijan is actually trying to make that preliminary, introduction to the thesis, that kind of a thing. You know what I'm saying? So this is what Azerbaijan is doing. But on the second part of it, that is, these all are the challenges, but there's a geopolitical challenges in the world as well, because the wars are going on. People are being displaced, right? There's a disruption in the energy routes. There's no energy coming in, or there's a problem with the energy routes, and there's a problem with the geopolitical problems, rivalries, the wars between, all these wars which are going on. Pakistan, Afghanistan has a problem. Iran and US and Israel has a problem, and Ukraine. So we just talk about this region. In the region where Azerbaijan is located, it's already 2 or 3 hot wars or cold wars, but they are going on. It's a disturbed region. And that's where Azerbaijan has emerged. And okay, fine, guys, but still in this kind of environment, we will talk about positivity. We will talk about the future problems, which is very severe, as I mentioned you, the details and all that. So, that's how it is. So obviously the governments are running slower than this, because urbanization is happening a lot. It is going beyond beyond the hands of the government and all that. But obviously all the governments would sit here in this forum for almost 6 days, I think, from 17 to, 22nd or something. So they will sit down, they will think about it, they will jot down the things, they will come up with some kind of a policy, they will talk to each other, give each other some kind of a suggestions and all that. And, talk about urbanization. I think Azerbaijan, after Karabakh war, is building very good, housing for the people who were displaced in war, right? So Azerbaijan has kind of a, Azerbaijan can even give its 2 cents, or tell the other people how they are building it, and Azerbaijan can show this kind of structures to the world leaders as this is what we are doing. So so the countries might learn from Azerbaijan as well at the same time, because it was a war zone, right? It was a war zone Azerbaijan took its territories back. Now Azerbaijan is building things there, infrastructure. I've been to Khankendi, all these places. I love the tunnels in there. I love the connections. I love the university is being built in Karabakh. So university in Karabakh is like a big thing. There was a war-stricken place for decades, and now people are getting education, they have a communication, they have housing, there would be a lot of other projects coming in. So Azerbaijan has done this exemplary work, which Azerbaijan can showcase it to the world that here, what I have done. So people can learn from Azerbaijan as well at the same time.
It's fascinating. You spoke there about many things, but you also spoke about the mayoral model of governance. And I'm interested in this because as cities grow, urbanization intensifies, do you think we're going to end up moving to a situation where, to some degree, cities outgrow states, where we become familiar primarily with the megacity? We devolve governance to it, it becomes the main thing. Are there any dangers with that, though?
Yes. I mean, it can outgrow. I mean, if you do not control, you do not make a proper kind of urban houses, and you do not control its or limit it and make your own kind of a choice for, I mean, you have to make sure that whatever development is going on, it is in your control. It is not damaging environment. It is not polluting the water. It is sustainable for a long time. This can only happen when the governments take the responsibility and don't let the people to do it on themselves. Otherwise, people would be, one guy would be wanting right in the middle of the sea, wanted his house. It cannot happen, right? Everybody wants. So the beaches will be full of houses. You cannot do that. But the governments should make a proper housing for this, for this people migrating in the cities, and should have a very, very, very sustainable projects. I mean, it should be sustainable for next 100 and 200 years. That kind of a thinking should be done.
Sheraz, always great to hear your analysis. I'm sure we'll see you around the event throughout the week. Thank you very much for coming in to speak to us.
My pleasure.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the G7 finance talks in Paris as debt concerns and market pressure rise amid tensions linked to Iran. Don't go away.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. G7 finance ministers are meeting in Paris on Monday with rising public debt and turbulence in global bond markets high on the agenda after recent tensions linked to Iran. Well, officials discussed the economic impact of the conflict as investors are worried that rising energy prices could drive inflation higher and potentially force further interest rate increases. Bond markets across Asia and the United States extended losses on Monday, while US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent urged G7 countries to tighten sanctions enforcement against Iran.
We come in at an important time. We're here to discuss the global economy, global imbalances, critical minerals, terror financing. I'm just back from Beijing with President Trump for a very successful visit where we talked the geopolitics, trade, and the leaders spent a great deal of time together. Tomorrow we will also be discussing sanctions and terror finance, and we call upon all our G7 and indeed all of our allies and the rest of the world to follow the sanctions regime so that we can crack down on the illicit finance that is fueling the Iranian war machine and get this money back to the Iranian people. So thank you all.
Well, for the latest from the G7 finance ministers meeting in Paris, A News' Ollie Barrett sent us this update from London.
Well, France says these are crucial discussions ahead of the G7 Leaders Summit, which is coming up in June, a key part of the preparation process for those leaders' meetings. And it's being described by the French presidency thus as a key step in the preparations for the economic and financial decisions that will be submitted to G7 leaders in June. And France is insisting that the discussions that are underway on Monday and Tuesday will pave the way for agreements between G7 members to look ahead to a more stable world. We're being directed towards three key themes by France when it comes to these discussions. The first is, in the words of the French, reducing global imbalances in order to re-establish a more level playing field between major economies, developing mutually beneficial international partnerships with developing countries, and establishing resilient, secure supply chains for critical minerals to reduce dependencies and protect against future shocks. But it's also being made clear that there are other items on the agenda as well, from support for Ukraine, from the current conflict in the Middle East, the conflict between the United States and Iran as well. Current affairs of mutual interest is how the French describe some of that. We also have officials from organisations at these talks, such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank as well. From a UK perspective, one of the things to keep an eye on is that Rachel Reeves and her American counterpart Scott Bessent are known to have had some angry conversations with each other in recent months, and there have also been tensions between London and Washington, and indeed between the Trump administration and various other G7 member states as well. So potentially some tricky conversations over the next couple of days. The talks when it comes to these finance ministers and central bank and financial organisation leaders, they're due to wrap up on Tuesday. Ollie Barrett in London for A News.
Well, joining me now is Professor of International Business in Washington, D.C., Babak Havezi, to discuss what the G7 finance ministers are hoping to achieve in Paris and whether the group can still steer the global economy through mounting uncertainty. Professor, very good indeed to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. The G7, for all intents and purposes, was built to coordinate responses to major economic shocks, wasn't it? At a moment like this, do you think it can still speak with one clear voice?
It can, in terms of the other members and creating an overall strategy and policy in terms of aligning the economic and geopolitical elements that are of strategic risk to the entire global economy, and especially to Western countries. So I think there's an overall process of developing the key elements that are challenging the global West, but also, but the implementation may be where the sticking point lies.
And we've spoken earlier about so many problems now that government ministers, world leaders need to handle all at the same time. If you just look at these finance ministers, you know, they're dealing with debt, inflation, geopolitical stability, all at the same time. Is there a sense in which there's just too many things to try and control?
There are things that are much more long-term, instead certain things like debt, that sovereign debt a lot of countries have. This is not something that's happened overnight. It has happened throughout decades of borrowing and spending. But there's also short-term microeconomic positions, such as the elements associated with the wars, both in the Middle East as well as in Ukraine, that are challenging it. And those are mounting. And then we have a tertiary element, which is the AI revolution, which is really, really fracturing the global economy on a technology side. So we have these kind of three elements that are simultaneously converging. And this convergence is creating major microeconomic problems. And they're going to have a major issue in dealing with all these elements simultaneously.
Yeah, on top of this, we've got the issues of conflict. As you say, Washington still pushing for tougher sanctions enforcement against Iran. Is there real agreement within the G7, do you think, especially given the possible impact on energy markets?
It doesn't seem that there is a unified policy as is associated with the Iran war. I think that Europe is on a different page in general than where the United States and Israel are, and even the UAE. I think that there is much disconnect, both in terms of policy and then also implementation. And I think that this divergence is really creating a lot of microeconomic headwinds in terms of inflation and increased oil prices and lack of energy in certain parts of the world.
We get used to talking about G7 leaders as almost being all-powerful, don't we? But if you look at G7 governments, many of them already are under a huge amount of pressure at home, aren't they? From borrowing costs, slower growth, enormous political pressure. You know, Keir Starmer, for example, really sort of clinging on to power. How much room, therefore, do some of these leaders have to actually make difficult economic choices?
I think it has become much more challenging. As you so correctly mentioned, many parts of Europe are below 1% GDP growth. This is really hampering their ability of being both fiscally sound and trying to stimulate the economy simultaneously. And in Europe specifically, there has been a lagging in manufacturing growth, which was a very key component of their overall economic system. So we're seeing systematic issues within the global economy, and in Europe in specific, that are really challenging their ability to grow and exponentially create value for their citizens. And it's really impacting how citizens view globalization. So I think that this meeting is actually probably the most important meetings that the G7 has had in the past 30 years. I think it's a movement away from efficiency and more towards resiliency. And I think that this will be looked at historically as the changing point in the global economic system of the G7.
Yeah, we're talking about global economic systems. Do you think there's a sense in which the G7 is able to be self-critical? I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, there are many emerging economies around the world who argue that the G7 protects its own interests while setting global financial rules for everybody else. Is that criticism becoming harder to ignore, do you think?
I disagree with that. I think that every sovereign nation is looking to increase its competitive advantage in any way possible. And obviously hegemonic powers, regional hegemonic powers, will do everything possible to maintain that. So I think that it is a valid critique, but it's the critique of globalization that has existed and international business, international commerce that has existed. I think that you have to look beyond that. But I think that where the winners of the early phase of globalization was the West, I think that now with the global South catching up, it is challenging the West, and the West has not figured out what the next step is in terms of their competitive advantage and where they can grow effectively. And this is where we're seeing the challenges of kind of looking inwards and figuring out who the West really is, where they can compete, and what barriers they need to put up to be able to keep those barriers, to keep those economic systems alive and well and resilient within their economic system.
Is that then the correct response to this, the sort of slight fragmentation we've seen, this sort of shift to what some analysts call a multi-polar world rather than a multilateral one? a little bit of protectionism that's taken place around the world. Is the response from the G7 to that to almost double down on globalization?
Yes, I think we're moving from hyper-globalization to what is called strategic globalization, meaning that you don't just move anywhere, anytime, at any financial model. There's resiliency involved, meaning that you look at yourself and see where should we go, who are the friends, who have certain values that are very similar to ours. And then you start collaborating with that. And that's where the fragmentation will happen. That's where geopolitical restructuring will happen globally, both in terms of commodities and birth of relationships, and they'll be forced to move along. And where necessary, nationalism will play a key role, and there's going to be national challenges and limitations in terms of trade. So I think that we're going to be going into that fragmentation and a realignment of globalization in general.
We've spoken a bit about bond markets already. Where is investor confidence collectively at the moment when it comes to an evaluation of what the G7 finance ministers are doing?
It depends on the country, but I think that overall we are seeing that inflation and the increasing prices and the deficit spending are forcing bond prices up. You cannot do everything simultaneously and expect interest rates to be lower. And I also think that we have come away from, generally speaking, a very, very low interest rate environment in the post-COVID era, great financial crisis era, and again, doubling down in the post-COVID era. I think that we thought of that as being the new normal, but it was driven predominantly by globalization. And once you remove globalization from efficiency to resiliency, inflation will catch up. So we should expect higher bond markets. We should expect higher sense of inflation globally, and especially when we are going to increase spending on military, on AI, on key infrastructures, on reshoring. So all of those elements and subsidies, those are all going to be negative for the bond market. So we should expect bonds and interest rates to go higher. And bond vigilantes will challenge certain countries, and it will become very, very critically important to have a coherent system. I think that the global south is where we're going to see a lot of failures. We're going to see, a lot of organizations, the global south, require IMF helping for the restructuring.
Interesting. Professor, great to get your analysis. We appreciate it very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Cuba's accusations against Washington as tensions rise over new sanctions and possible military action. Don't go away.
Moi, Luis Moreno Campo, déclare solennellement.
We've seen remarkable developments between Baku and Yerevan.
We are against all of this kind of peace.
Russia does not want Pashinyan to win. Russia wants perpetual conflict.
Region that's in conflict or in tension is better for their ability to play a role.
Russian oligarchs are less about money and more about political influence. Russia can make its own interventions through online postings.
Que j'ai rempli de mes devoirs et exercerai mes attributions de procureur de la Cour pénale internationale.
Money in politics everywhere is corrupting influence, but when it becomes weaponized by a foreign power.
The main thing we have money. Too much resources, too much money.
The main topic is to change Pashinyan.
They have both and big bosses, which is in Russia.
L'impartialité et en toute conscience.
We are for pressuring Pashinyan. We are organizing rallies on the streets.
Et que je répéterai le caractère confidentiel des enquêtes.
They are election time. And election time is everything binary.
Nosotros pedimos que remuevan a Pashinyan.
Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. Cuba's Foreign Minister, Bruno Rodriguez, has accused the United States of fabricating what he described as a fraudulent case to justify fresh economic sanctions and possible military action against Havana. Well, the comments followed an Axios report citing classified US intelligence claiming Cuba had acquired more than 300 military drones and discussed possible attacks on Guantanamo Bay and other American targets. Well, Rodriguez rejected the allegations, saying Cuba neither threatens nor wants war and is prepared only for self-defense under the UN Charter. A senior US official told Axios the Trump administration views Cuba as a growing threat because of developments in drone warfare. Well, Stephanie Butendik-Ehara, Latin America analyst and contributor to Al Majalla, is joining us from London to discuss the growing tensions between Washington and Havana. Stephanie, very good indeed to have you with us. Thank you for joining us tonight. Very interesting, this, isn't it? 6 decades. I mean, as you touched on in your recent article, 6 decades of sanctions have not removed Cuba's government. Why does Washington still believe in this policy?
I think that Washington continues this policy not because it has succeeded particularly, but because it's become very difficult politically to abandon. The embargo was born in the Cold War context when the United States believed that economic isolation could weaken the Cuban government, force concessions as well, or eventually produce political change. However, as you mentioned, more than 6 decades later, that logic has clearly not delivered the result it promised. It has not removed Cuba's government, nor has it produced a democratic transition. In fact, in many ways, it has helped the Cuban state present itself as a small country resisting a much larger power. So what matters now is not only whether the embargo is effective. The evidence suggests that it's not. What matters more is why it continues despite that failure. And part of the answer lies in the institutional inertia. So once a policy has been in place for so long, it becomes embedded in legislation, in congressional politics, in the language of human rights and democracy promotion, and the symbolic politics. And in the symbolic politics of being seen as a quote unquote tough on Havana. And there is also a domestical political dimension. So Cuba is tied to electoral politics, particularly in Florida, where voters of Cuban origin have historically played an important role. So in my view, is that the embargo has outlived its original Cold War logic. It continues not because it has delivered regime change, but because it has become a policy of inheritance, symbolism, and domestic calculation, rather than a strategy with a realistic path to political transformation.
Yeah, and as you've touched on, Cuba itself obviously facing shortages, migration, economic strain. How much of that is caused by US pressure, and how much of it comes from the decisions made in Havana, this inertia that you've just spoken about?
Well, I don't think it is analytically useful to use only one cause, because Cuba's crisis is shaped by both external pressure and internal decisions. On one hand, US pressure matters. The embargo restricts Cuba's access to trade, finance, investments, and parts of the international banking system, making it harder for the country to import goods, access credit, attract investment, and operate normally in the global economy. So it clearly narrows Cuba's room for maneuver, and that has consequences for ordinary Cubans. But on the other hand, the embargo does not explain everything. Havana's own decision also matters. Cuba has a highly centralized economic system, a limited private sector, weak productivity, monetary problems, and strong political controls, with which these internal factors shape how the country responds to pressure, and they also help explain why reforms have been slow, partial, or even inconsistent. So I would not frame this as either Washington or Havana. It's both. US sanctions intensify the crisis and make recovery much harder. But the Cuban government is really under external pressure, and internal governance reinforces each other as well. So the embargo gives Havana less economic space, while Havana's their own model often uses that pressure to justify more control rather than more openness.
Yes, and in terms of the feeling inside Cuba, I mean, Cuban leaders often point to the embargo, don't they, when explaining hardship at home. Has Washington, in a sense, given them an external enemy to blame? Is this a case of actually strengthening the resolve inside Cuba rather than weakening it?
Yes. I think Washington has given Cuban leaders a very powerful external enemy to point to. But this, as well, has to be very carefully understood. Again, the embargo does not invent all of Cuba's problems, and it should not be used to absolve Havana of responsibility for domestic repression, for poor economic management, or the limits placed on the Cuban society. But it does give the Cuban state a very effective explanatory frame, since for decades Cuban leaders have been able to say that hardship is not mainly the result of international decisions, but the consequences of hostility from a much larger power. And that narrative is very powerful because it contains an element of truth. And the embargo doesn't restrict Cuba's economy. It does restrict Cuba's economy, and it also creates pressure, and it also affects ordinary lives and people's livelihoods. But the Cuban government also uses that pressure politically. In that sense, the embargo helps Havana transform hardship into language of resistance. And consequently, the shortages, stagnation, and the frustrations can be framed not as failures of domestic governance, but as evidence that Cuba is under siege And when dissent appears, the government can more easily present it as connected to foreign pressure rather than as a legitimate expression of internal dissatisfaction. So in that sense, the embargo has produced a paradox. It was meant to weaken the Cuban state, but in many ways, it has strengthened one of the state's most important political arguments, which is that Cuba is defending its sovereignty against U.S. hostility. And, well, this does not mean that Havana is simply a victim. The Cuban leadership remains responsible for its very own decisions, but Washington has given it already a ready-made external enemy, and that helped the government explain and justify and deflect attention from the failure of its own system.
And in terms of this, you touched on earlier the Floridian facts. How much of Cuba's policy do you think is now shaped by domestic politics, particularly in Florida, where, as you say, it's home to a large Cuban-American voting bloc, as opposed to actual foreign policy results?
The domestic politics are, they're central to understanding why this policy has lasted for so long. Cuba policy is not only about them, right? It's also become a part of the domestic electoral politics in Florida, specifically and especially there. Florida has often been a very important swing state, and voters of Cuban origin have historically had a significant political influence there. So for many U.S. politicians, Cuba's policy is not judged only by whether it produces results on the island. It is also judged by how it plays it domestically. And this means that politicians are speaking to Cuba, but they are also speaking to voters in Florida, to Congress, to a wider domestic audience that still associates a hard line with moral clarity. And at the same time, I think it's also important not to treat voters of Cuban origin as a single bloc. There are generational differences, political differences with personal histories that shape how people view Cuba and U.S. policy. And some may strongly support hardline measures, while others favor more contact-level reminiscences and engagement with the Cuban society. So the broader point is that Cuba's policy has become a domestic political symbol in the U.S. It is not simply a foreign policy instrument judged by results. If it were judged only by the results, then 6 decades without democratic transition would force a much more serious reconsideration.
Okay, 6 decades.
Yes, Florida matters.
Florida matters indeed. And 6 decades then without a transition, as you would argue, this policy just hasn't worked. What then would be a better or more realistic policy, do you think, for the US to follow?
A more realistic U.S. approach, it would begin by recognizing that isolation hasn't worked as a kind of substitute for strategy. Washington has treated pressure as if it would eventually produce political transformation in Cuba, but the result has not been democratic transition or greater stability. Instead, the embargo has helped deepen the hardship for Cuban residents, citizens, giving Havana a powerful external enemy to blame as well, and has left the U.S. Increasingly isolated on these issues internationally. So a more realistic approach would not mean ignoring human rights or democratic freedoms. Those concerns are real and should always remain central. But I think the question is how to pursue them in a way that is actually effective. In my view, that would mean separating targeted pressure on repression from broad measures that affect the wider population. And sanctions should focus more carefully on officials and institutions directly involved in abuses rather than maintaining a general framework that makes life harder for Cubans in their life, and it also gives the Cuban government political cover.
Yes.
So it would mean expanding channels of contact with Cuban society, such as humanitarian assistance, family remittances, academic exchange, cultural links as well, independent journalism, and so on. And these areas where engagements can create more space for Cubans themselves.
Stephanie, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We appreciate your analysis. Thanks for being on the show tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan's visit to Germany and what it means for the future of Turkey-Europe relations. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching this evening. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and his German counterpart Johann Weidenfeld have held a joint press conference in Berlin after reviving a strategic dialogue mechanism between Turkey and Germany for the first time in more than a decade. Well, the talks covered Turkey-EU ties, Gaza, Iran, and the growing crisis around the Strait of Hormuz. Here are the details.
Hakan Fidan's visit to Berlin is being framed as a reset in Turkish-German diplomacy. The two foreign ministers co-chaired the third Turkey-Germany strategic dialogue mechanism, a platform launched in 2013 but dormant since 2014. According to Turkey's foreign ministry, the talks focused on bilateral relations, Turkey-EU ties, security and defense, and regional issues. At a joint press conference, Fidan said the war involving Iran must be solved through diplomacy, adding that Turkey would continue with all its might to help bring the conflict to an end. He also condemned Israel's forced interception of the Gaza-bound Samud aid flotilla, saying 25 vessels had been stopped by Israel on Monday in violation of international law. Fidan described the interception as thuggery. Waterfall, for his part, said Germany wants to expand strategic ties between Turkey and the European Union. On the Palestine-Israel conflict, he said Germany, like Turkey, supports a two-state solution, while also stressing Berlin's support for Israel's right to self-defense. The German foreign minister also repeated the assertion that Iran must not obtain nuclear weapons. Both ministers warned about the global impact of the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which has intensified concerns over energy prices, supply security, and shipping routes. Based on what was said at the press conference on Monday, the meeting in Berlin wasn't only about Turkish-German relations. Rather, it was also about how Ankara and Berlin coordinate on the crises now shaping Europe, the Middle East, and global energy markets. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Well, joining me now is political analyst and historian Al Tuna to discuss the significance of Hakan Fidan's visit to Germany and what it might tell us about the wider direction of Turkey-Europe relations. Al, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime tonight. A lot to be discussed then between the two sides: trade, migration, security. Do you think it suggests that both sides now see the relationship as more strategically important?
Thank you very much for having me tonight. And yes, I think so. The relationship has always been important, of course, but for a long time it was treated mainly through separate files, as you mentioned, such as trade, migration, NATO, diaspora issues, and EU-Turkey relations. But what is changing now is that Berlin and Ankara seems to be trying to connect these files into a more strategic framework. Of course, this does not mean that all disagreements have disappeared. There are still tensions over domestic politics, Gaza, Cyprus, the Eastern Mediterranean, and EU accession. But both sides increasingly understand that Germany-Turkey relations are too important to be managed only through crisis diplomacy. Of course, we are not talking about a romantic relationship or a German-Turkish couple here, but still, both sides are handling the issue and seeing it as a strategic, pragmatic resolution, maybe, on some critical issues. So I would say that this visit reflects not a romantic reset, but a pragmatic recognition. Germany needs Turkey for security, migration, energy, and regional diplomacy. On the other hand, Turkey needs Germany for Europe, trade, and defense technology.
And as you rightly say, Al, so much going on in the world at the moment that it seems like right now it really matters that these two huge powers find a way to get on in the best way possible, doesn't it? The biggest economy in Europe, and then the huge influence of Turkey, the huge military force it has, the huge influence in the region. The world really needs these two nations to get on right now.
Yes, as you said, world needs it, Europe needs it, Turkey needs it, all countries in the region needs it, because Germany and Turkey, yes, they have their disagreements on several issues for decades. But now they're realizing that they can integrate their strengths into a more cooperative partnership, a more beneficial union for the good of both countries, for Europe, for Middle East, and so on. So we should not forget that Turkey is the second largest trade partner of Germany. Same goes for Turkey, vice versa. And also, as you said, Turkey is a major military power within NATO, one of the most significant diplomatic and, again, military power in the Middle East. Turkey has access and channels both to Tehran, European capitals, to Washington, D.C., Moscow. So Germany is now more increasingly treating Turkey as a benefactor, as a partner that can offer leverage to Germany's diplomatic and economic adventures in the neighboring regions. But same goes for Turkey. Turkey also needs Germany. There are decades-long relationships. We are talking about millions of Turkish citizens, German-born Turkish citizens in Germany. There's a huge diaspora. So both capitals need each other, and hopefully they are realizing that now, and especially Berlin, because we know that up until the mid-2010s, there was an ongoing positive relationship between two countries, especially under Madam Merkel's chancellorship. However, as you mentioned in the beginning, this strategic meeting, it stopped after the second meeting 13 years ago, and now Foreign Minister Fidan and his German partner, they met again, and I hope this will help both countries' problems to be resolved, handled much more carefully, and also, as you mentioned, the world needs it. This partnership can offer much to the region and the world.
Yeah, and as you touched on, military prowess, security, a key component to the discussions. Defence cooperation becoming more visible in Germany and Turkey ties, isn't it? There's no coyness anymore to that element of the relationship. Do you think Berlin is now placing greater value on Ankara's role in regional security?
Yes, but again, I would define this carefully. Berlin is not giving Ankara a blank check, but Germany is clearly placing greater value, as you said, on Turkey's role as a military and regional security actor. This is partly because Germany's own strategic outlook has changed after the war in Ukraine and now the turmoil in Middle East. Europe needs more defense capacity, more industrial cooperation, and more reliable regional partners. Turkey has NATO's second largest army, a growing defense industry, and operational experience in several theaters, from Syria to Black Sea, the Caucasus, Libya, and so on. The Eurofighter issue, for example, it is symbolically important here. For years, defense cooperation was constrained by political mistrust, especially from the European side. Now we see a more pragmatic German approach that does not erase the political disagreements, of course, but it shows that security and defense are becoming central to the relationship.
And you've spoken already about the significant bilateral trade between the two countries. We know, as we discussed, that Turkey wants deeper engagement with Europe more widely. Germany obviously remains a key EU power. Given all of that, what realistic progress do you think could come from this visit?
Again, realistically speaking, I do not expect a breakthrough in Turkey's EU accession process. That file remains politically still very difficult. But there can be progress in more concrete areas such as customs union modernization, visa facilitation for Turkish citizens. These are the main issues Hakan Fidan and Turkish Foreign Ministry almost for several years they are mentioning, stressing out these important issues. But also migration management, energy cooperation, defense industry, counterterrorism dialogue, and structured political consultations between two countries. So these are the areas we can expect some more positive and increasing progress. And Germany matters here because it is not just another EU member state. It is the key economic power in Europe and has major influence over other countries in the Union's approach to Turkey. So even limited German support can help reopen channels between Ankara and Brussels. This is very important. Also, I can say that the most realistic outcome is not EU membership in the short term or mid-term, but a more institutionalized relationship between the two. More regular strategic dialogue, more economic coordination, and more selective cooperation in security and defense.
So many of these.
You're very breakthrough, but still, yeah.
A point well made that the coordination, the increased strategic coherence is something that looks like a positive outcome from this meeting. But this is also beyond the kind of mechanisms. There's also a human connection, a cultural connection here too, isn't there? As you've touched on, Germany's got one of the world's largest Turkish diasporas. How much does that human link, do you think, still shape relations between Berlin and Ankara?
Yes, we're talking about some number between 3 to 5 million, maybe more. A huge diaspora, world's largest Turkish diaspora, actually, and this diaspora shapes the relationship very deeply. The Turkish community there in Germany is not just a demographic fact, but it's a social, cultural, economic, political bridge, actually, between the two countries. But it's also a source of sensitivity into different domestic political arenas. Domestic politics in Turkey often echoes inside Germany, and debates in Germany about immigration, citizenship, Islam, migration, or loyalty can affect how Ankara perceives Berlin. And the same goes for German politics. So diaspora is both an asset and a pressure point. It creates familiarity between two cultures, two peoples, two countries, two states, and interdependence. Maybe the most important, the key term here is interdependence. But it can also turn domestic political debates into bilateral issues. Still, in the long term, this human link is one of the reasons why Germany-Turkey relations can never be reduced to ordinary diplomacy. As I said before, we are not talking about a romantic partnership, but still, we have much to hope for the future of German-Turkish relations thanks to this diaspora. And also German citizens' investment and other adventures in Turkey. So the relationship is not only state to state, but it's also a society to society relationship. And as I said, we can be hopeful thanks to diaspora for the future of German-Turkish relationship. But also it is an asset that Ankara can find some place to use in the future.
Not romantic, but a hopeful future ahead. Alcina, political analyst and historian, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us.
Moi, Luis Moreno Campo, déclare solennellement.
We've seen remarkable developments between Baku and Yerevan.
We are against all of this kind of peace.
Russia does not want Pashinyan to win. Russia wants perpetual conflict.
Region that's in conflict or in tension is better for their ability to play a role.
Russian oligarchs are less about money and more about political influence. Russia can make its own interventions through online postings.
Que j'ai rempli mes devoirs et exercerai mes attributions de procureur de la Cour pénale internationale.
Money in politics everywhere is corrupting influence, but when it becomes weaponized by a foreign power.
The main thing we have money. Too much resources, too much money.
The main topic is to change Pashinyan.
There are boss and big boss. Big boss which is in Russia.
L'impartialité et en toute conscience.
We are for pressuring Pashinyan. We are organizing rallies on the streets.
Et que Déjà répéterai le caractère confidentiel des enquêtes.
They are election time. Well, and election time is everything binary.
Nosotros pedimos que remuevan a Pashinyan.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Georgia is under renewed scrutiny after declining to join dozens of countries backing efforts to prosecute Russia over the war in Ukraine, with Tbilisi pointing to what it sees as mixed signals from Europe. And Nini Nikolashvili has more from Tbilisi.
On May 15th in Moldova's capital, a historic vote took shape. 34 Council of Europe member states plus Australia, Costa Rica and the European Union formally adopted the enlarged partial agreement to establish a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. The tribunal, designed to fill a gap the ICC cannot, prosecuting senior Russian political and military leaders for the decision to invade Ukraine, represents a new chapter in international accountability. But 10 Council of Europe members stayed out. That list includes EU members, Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria and Malta, 4 Balkan states, and from the South Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia and Turkey. Armenia and Azerbaijan are presently pursuing their own peace agenda, with the actual agreement having already been initialed, yet Yerevan is still deeply connected with the Russia-dominated Eurasian Economic Union. Georgian Foreign Minister Makabachorishvili said that the attitude of some EU member states towards Georgia prevents Tbilisi from making decisions that could create additional risks. The government also points out that Georgia has joined roughly 1,000 international resolutions supporting Ukraine, framing the tribunal refusal not as a pro-Russia move, but as a response to what it sees as EU inconsistency. Critics at home call that reasoning hollow. A country under active occupation, they argue, cannot afford selective solidarity. Then there is Hungary. Even after its pro-European political earthquake this April, Budapest still did not join. The tribunal will move forward, but the map of who joined and who did not tells its own story about where Europe's fracture lines still run. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Iran and Pakistan have been discussing the stalled US-Iran negotiations as efforts to preserve a fragile ceasefire continue without any major breakthrough. Our correspondent brings more from Tehran.
Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsen Raza Naqvi visited Tehran over the weekend, during which he met his counterpart, as well as President Masoud Pezeshkian and Parliamentary Speaker and top negotiator with the US, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. According to official sources, the two sides discussed security cooperation to promote cross-border trade, as well as the latest regional developments, including the blocked Iran-US peace talks mediated by Pakistan. President Pezeshkian praised neighboring Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iraq for preventing terrorists and invading countries from misusing their territory against Iran, and especially appreciated Pakistan for its mediation efforts resulting in a ceasefire. As the Iran-US standoff is escalating, while they have refused to provide the other side with noticeable concessions for the resumption of peace talks, diplomacy has been at work amid a fragile ceasefire. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held phone calls with his counterparts from South Korea, Qatar, France and Turkey over the weekend on bilateral ties and latest regional developments, including the current diplomatic processes. The calls were made after he returned from a visit to India to take part in the BRICS ministerial meeting last week. On the sidelines of the New Delhi meeting, Araghchi urged the US to seek a solution to its dispute with Iran beyond the military option. And in a new sign of escalation, the state-owned IRIB TV has been broadcasting programs on weapon training, from light machine guns to portable RPG launchers. A senior official of the state broadcaster defended the programs, saying they serve the purpose of educating cultural and social responsibility as the country is still under threat of a renewed Israel-US war. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from downtown Tehran, Foreign News.
Ukraine is looking to deepen ties with Central Asia, proposing a new regional dialogue platform focused on trade, logistics and direct cooperation. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova has more from Tashkent.
Ukraine is seeking to strengthen ties with Central Asia through a proposed Ukraine plus Central Asia dialogue platform focused on economic cooperation, transport connectivity and regional dialogue. In an interview with Times of Central Asia, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said that the initiative would focus on direct dialogue without intermediaries and would not be directed against any country. According to him, Kyiv sees growing strategic importance in Central Asia as the region expands its role in global transport, trade and energy networks. A key priority for Kyiv is participation in the Trans-Caspian International Transport Road, or Middle Corridor, linking China, Central Asia, the South Caucasus, the Black Sea and the European Union. Ukraine says its Black Sea ports could serve as an important western gateway for trade flows along the road. Kazakhstan was described as Ukraine's key regional partner. The minister noted that intergovernmental consultations and business dialogue between the two countries have resumed after a long pause, with growing Ukrainian business interests in agriculture, engineering, food processing and IT sectors. The foreign minister also highlighted humanitarian cooperation, saying Kazakhstan has provided around 600 tons of aid to Ukraine since the start of the war, and has hosted Ukrainian children for rehabilitation programs. Ukraine says it sees Central Asia as an increasingly important partner for long-term economic and regional cooperation. It is Sevil Rajapova reported from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Water security is back in focus across Central Asia as regional governments hold talks over distribution and supply ahead of the summer irrigation season. Our correspondent reports now from Kazakhstan.
Water is once again moving to the top of Central Asia's agenda as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan begin talks over the upcoming irrigation season. With summer temperatures rising, the focus is on one question: how to manage shared water resources at a time of growing pressure across the region. One of the key issues is water supply through the interstate Dostok Canal, which irrigates the Maktaral and Jetisar districts in southern Kazakhstan's Turkestan region, one of the country's main agricultural areas. Officials from the three countries are discussing how the Bahri Turjik reservoir will operate between June and August 2026, the most demanding period of the irrigation season. Kazakhstan is represented by Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation Nurjan Nurjigitov, who says fair distribution of transboundary water remains a priority for countries sharing the Sirdarya River basin. The talks come as water shortages deepen across Central Asia. Scientists warn that agricultural water demand could rise by as much as 30% by 2030, while experts say growing shortages may also affect energy supply, food production and public health. At the same time, Kazakhstan is testing new ways to reduce drought risks. In Turkestan, authorities have launched a weather modification project aimed at increasing rainfall, making Kazakhstan the first country in Central Asia to put this technology into practical use. International estimates suggest such methods can increase precipitation by up to 20%, helping improve water supply across more than 911,000 hectares of farmland, with a potential economic impact of around $75 million a year. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Vladimir Putin has arrived in Beijing for an official visit, with talks expected between the Russian and Chinese presidents during the two-day trip. A News's Abahayat Jafarova brings us more from the Chinese capital.
During the Russian president's visit to China, discussions will focus on bilateral relations and the current state and future prospects of Russian-Chinese ties, particularly in trade and economic cooperation, which consistently exceeds $200 billion. The two sides will also address the international agenda, exchanging views on key global and regional issues, as well as recent interactions between China and the United States. In addition, humanitarian cooperation will form a significant part of the discussions, highlighted by the joint launch of the Cross Years of Education between Russia and China, aimed at enhancing academic and scientific exchanges. Following the negotiations, a joint statement by the two heads of state, along with a number of bilateral agreements ranging from intergovernmental to interdepartmental level, is expected to be signed. Throughout his presidency, Vladimir Putin has visited China approximately 20 times. His most recent visit took place in late August and early September 2025, resulting in the signing of more than 20 documents, including a memorandum on the construction of the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. The project, planned since 2006, has faced delays due to disagreements over commercial terms. Putin's upcoming visit to China is attracting heightened international attention. It comes shortly after US President Donald Trump's recent trip to China, during which he spent 3 days in the country from 13 to 15 May. Trump announced the conclusion of several what he described as fantastic deals, including China's agreement to purchase 200 Boeing aircraft. Putin's visit may mark the first time Beijing has hosted the leaders of two major world powers within a single month outside the framework of international summits or multilateral events. Abahayat Jafarova, A News, Beijing, China.
After the break, we'll take a look at the top stories of the day. Do not go away. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. US President Donald Trump is ramping up pressure on Iran after a drone strike sparked a fire at a nuclear plant in the United Arab Emirates. The latest tensions come as reported peace proposals between Washington and Tehran appear increasingly strained.
regime's conventional ballistic missile.
US President Donald Trump has issued a new warning to Iran, saying in a Truth Social post that the clock is ticking and urging Iranian leaders to get moving fast. The post came after a drone strike caused a fire at the Barakah nuclear power plant in the United Arab Emirates. Officials in Abu Dhabi say an investigation is underway and stressed the UAE has the right to respond to what it called terrorist attacks. Saudi Arabia also says it intercepted 3 drones entering from Iraqi airspace and warned it would take necessary operational measures to protect its sovereignty and security. The developments come as progress appears stalled in efforts to end the US-Israeli war with Iran and restart shipping in the Gulf. Axios also reports Trump is expected to meet top national security advisors on Tuesday to discuss options for military action regarding Iran. Meanwhile, Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reports that the United States has outlined 5 conditions in response to Tehran's latest peace proposal, citing an informed source. According to the report, the conditions include refusing to pay compensation or war damages, Iran transferring 400 kilograms of enriched uranium to the United States, and Iran being allowed to keep only 1 nuclear facility operational. The report also says Washington rejected unfreezing Iranian assets, while ceasefires on various fronts would be conditional on the start of negotiations. Fars adds that Iran has demanded an end to hostilities, the lifting of sanctions, compensation for war damage, and recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz as conditions for a second round of talks. There has been no official response from either Iran or the United States regarding the report.
At least 8 people were reported killed in Israeli strikes across the Gaza Strip, according to local health officials. The latest escalation also included the killing of a senior Hamas commander, as ceasefire talks between the two sides remain stalled. Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip killed at least 8 people on Sunday, according to Gaza health officials, as ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas showed little progress. The Israeli military said the strikes targeted Hamas militants and infrastructure, while Palestinian health officials reported civilian casualties in several incidents. In central Gaza, an airstrike near a community kitchen close to Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Bala killed at least 3 people, with medics also reporting 2 further deaths in a separate strike near a bakery in the same area. Emergency crews and residents searched through rubble after strikes hit a residential building in Gaza. Witnesses described heavy destruction and fires in the area, while Palestinian civil defense officials said rescue efforts were hindered by limited equipment and ongoing damage. Israel confirmed the killing of senior Hamas commander Izz al-Din al-Haddad in a strike on Gaza City on Friday. Hamas later confirmed his death, along with members of his family.
Over the weekend, we eliminated the master murderer Izz al-Din al-Haddad. He was effectively number 1 in Hamas's military wing, that is Hamas in Gaza, and he has been eliminated.
Indirect talks toward a long-term ceasefire remain ongoing, with both sides still divided over key security arrangements and the terms of a possible agreement. Lebanese officials say Israeli strikes have hit several towns, killing at least 5 people, including 2 children, and leaving others wounded. Well, several towns were hit with further attacks and drone activity reported elsewhere, including over the capital Beirut and nearby areas, despite a ceasefire extension intended to ease border tensions. At least 87 people have died in the latest Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as the World Health Organization declares the crisis an international public health emergency, and neighboring Uganda steps up surveillance following imported cases linked to the virus.
Health authorities in Central Africa are intensifying efforts to contain a growing Ebola outbreak in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, as neighbouring Uganda steps up surveillance following imported cases linked to the virus. Emergency treatment centres are being prepared in DR Congo's Ituri province as the World Health Organization declared the Ebola outbreak an international public health emergency. Africa Centres for Disease Control and Prevention says at least 336 suspected and confirmed infections and 87 deaths have been recorded so far in the country's 17th Ebola outbreak since 1976. Health teams are working in Bunia, Rwampara and Mongwalu to isolate patients and trace contacts in a region already struggling with insecurity and limited healthcare access. DR Congo's health minister urged residents to seek medical help quickly.
The sooner we take the patient in for care, the sooner we treat them, the sooner we will stop the movement, what we call the spread of the virus. So this is not a mystical disease. Make yourself known. Make yourself known so that you can be taken care of and so that we can prevent the disease from spreading. That is really the message. Treatment is free. Come and get treated.
Regional concern has also spread into Uganda, where authorities confirmed a fatal imported case involving a Congolese man who had travelled to Kampala. The World Health Organization warns that cross-border movement and weak surveillance systems could complicate containment efforts. Some residents fear the outbreak could disrupt travel and daily life, while others called for stronger awareness campaigns and preventive measures.
It creates a challenge with the travel element because then Uganda lies at a risk of facing a travel ban, and for a person like me who is engaged in travels here and there, if we are put on a travel ban, very many things in the background get disorganized and it is not good for the country as a whole. I would like the government to, one, quickly spread awareness about Ebola and how it is spread, to break down this information even for the layest of people to understand, but also start to institute measures to avoid the spread of Ebola in Kampala and Uganda as a whole, so that there is a feeling of safeness, of security against this disease of Ebola.
Someone who works in Kampala, I didn't receive well the news of Ebola outbreak in Uganda because I work in an environment where I meet many people every day. So it puts me on a high risk of getting also Ebola.
Health authorities across the region say surveillance, contact tracing and public awareness efforts are now being intensified as officials work to prevent the outbreak from spreading further beyond eastern DR Congo and Uganda.
Parts of southern Somalia are facing a growing risk of famine as humanitarian agencies warn aid must be rapidly scaled up. The United Nations says worsening hunger and shrinking assistance are pushing vulnerable districts closer to catastrophe.
United Nations agencies are warning that parts of southern Somalia could tip into famine if humanitarian aid is not urgently increased amid a deepening food crisis across the country. The alert comes alongside a UN-sponsored report, which said a district in southern Somalia is at risk of famine. The first time any part of the country has reached such a critical level of hunger since 2022. Somalia, already one of the world's most food-insecure nations due to drought, conflict and poverty, last experienced famine in 2011 when around 250,000 people died and came close again in 2017 and 2022. UNICEF says the situation is rapidly worsening.
In Somalia today, hunger is no longer only about empty stomachs. It's about a fight for children to survive disease, displacement, and the collapse of basic services. Almost 1/3 of the population will face acute food insecurity between April and June 2026. Nearly 1.9 million people are already in emergency levels of hunger. That number has tripled in less than a year. And now famine risk has emerged in southwest Somalia if humanitarian aid cannot scale up and if drought and economic shocks worsen further, which is expected.
Aid agencies also warn that children are bearing the brunt of a crisis driven by multiple failed rainy seasons, ongoing insecurity, rising food and fuel prices, and falling humanitarian funding, which has dropped significantly compared to previous years.
We have a window of opportunity to prevent the worst outcomes.
With rapid and scaled up humanitarian action now, famine can still be averted. There's a narrow but critical window of opportunity in the coming weeks to prevent famine in Barakaba and other high-risk districts. And the analysis makes clear that while famine is not yet occurring today, it could develop if conditions deteriorate further, meaning that timely action now could change that trajectory.
UN data shows humanitarian funding for Somalia this year has fallen sharply compared to last year, even as millions continue to face crisis-level food insecurity or worse.
Construction has reached a key milestone on a major hydropower project in Angola's Kwanza River Valley, marking the start of large-scale works on one of the country's biggest energy investments. Well, the project is expected to significantly boost electricity generation and support regional power sharing once completed.
On the banks of Angola's Kwanza River, one of Africa's biggest energy projects is taking shape as workers pour the first concrete, marking a turning point for one of Angola's most ambitious energy bets.
Entering the concrete pouring phase marks the project's transition from preparation works into the core stage of main construction. Key structures, such as the dam body and powerhouse, are now beginning to take physical shape.
At 2,172 megawatts, it will be the largest Chinese-built hydropower plant on the continent. A 116-meter-high wall, 1.5 million cubic meters of concrete, reshaping the valley. For Angola, a top oil producer where millions still lack reliable power, this will be transformational.
Kakulu Kabasa to Angola means more development for all of us, more capacity of energy. First, our factories and large industries may have the energy capacity they want to able to meet the ideal production to serve the country. Second, Angola may trade some megawatts of energy to some neighboring countries.
But experts warn that generating electricity is only part of the challenge. Transmission lines, storage, and regional coordination are just as critical.
It has an impact, and that's what we are encouraging. But are we making a progress? Certainly we are making a progress. Is that enough? Not enough. And we have to accelerate.
Angola's president sees a way forward by sharing power across borders, if investors help build the transmission lines.
It is our intention to share part of the energy we produce with neighboring countries in SADC and Central Africa, provided there are investors interested in building the power transmission lines through public-private partnerships or private investment.
For the young generation, this is more than just megawatts.
We have a generation to prepare so that the future can be bright for everyone. I dream of Angola with better education opportunities, better life, a better country for those who live here.
From first concrete to future powered by its own river, Angola is racing for energy security, industrial growth, and economic independence.
During talks in Addis Ababa, African and UN leaders voiced concern over conflict, foreign interference and mounting economic pressure across the continent, while renewing calls for reform of global institutions, including the UN Security Council.
The 10th African Union and UN high-level partnership dialogue at the African Union headquarters. The discussions focused on strengthening cooperation between the African Union and the United Nations in areas including peacekeeping, mediation efforts, and humanitarian response. African Union Commission Chairperson Mohamed Ali Yusuf warned that external interference continues to fuel instability in several parts of the continent, complicating peace efforts led by African institutions.
Most of our crises on the continent are fueled from abroad. Financial resources, ammunition, sometimes even fighters come to fight another war from other continents. It's a real curse for us. All the efforts that the African Union, the UN, we are deploying to contain these crises are exacerbated by this kind of interferences.
The UN chief also raised concerns over Africa's growing debt burden and what he described as unequal global financial structures that continue to limit development financing for many African countries.
Today's global financial architecture is not providing adequate levels of support nor sufficient voice and participation for Africa. Many African countries face vast debt repayments that drain public resources and undermine long-term investment in critical systems.
The discussions also highlighted Africa's long-standing calls for reform of global governance institutions, including the UN Security Council. Guterres reiterated support for greater African representation, describing the continent's exclusion from permanent membership as a historical injustice.
A Security Council that today does not represent geographically the realities of the world. We have 3 European permanent members, 1 North American and 1 Asian, no Latin America, no African. Is obviously a Security Council that has a problem of legitimacy, and that brings with it a problem of effectiveness.
The meeting concluded with a peace and security declaration formulation calling for the urgent need for reforms on the UN Security Council in order to realize effectiveness and proper representation.
Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime. Please do join us tomorrow for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.